Alexis, eu gostaria que você começasse a falar sobre o trabalho aqui do Harmony Institute.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Harmony Institute is a think tank. So what this means is that we do research, and the goal is not to create products to sell, but to understand better the phenomena of how media works and how media influences individuals, groups, and societies. So we do this in a number of ways. As you know, media is huge. There's no single way to study it. So we are interdisciplinary. So what this means is that we work with postdoctoral research fellows in neuroscience, in computer science. On staff we have social scientists, linguists, people with expertise in psychology, and also a number of data scientists. And the reason that we do this is because we want to both understand the human experience of how people experience media, how they are influenced by it, and how it affects their actions. But we also want to understand, sort of on a global scale, looking at the digital landscape, how does a story go from an origin point to ultimately influencing a large group of people?
E quais são as conquistas até agora desse trabalho que você acaba de descrever?
So Harmony Institute's been here for about 7 years. It was founded by one of the co-founders of BuzzFeed. So as you may have heard, BuzzFeed is this sort of viral media website. It's a news site with lists of, so it's their kind of calling card. And after the success of BuzzFeed, the founder of Harmony Institute, Sean Johnson, realized they didn't understand why things were going viral. They didn't understand how it became so popular. So they founded Harmony Institute as a way to ask this question: how do stories spread, and how do ideas ultimately impact and change people's minds?
Na sua opinião, o que a tecnologia pode fazer a serviço do homem?
Well, I think, technology is a tool, like in many other tools, but it's unlike any other tool that we've really had, in the sense that it's transformed not only our actions, as any tool, use something you use, but it's transformed our expectations. So people expect information, they expect to know what's going on in a way that it would never have occurred to people 50, 100 years ago. There's been, of course, all the statistics about the amount of information we produce and consume in a single day being greater than, for instance, what was produced from 0 AD to the 1800s. But when you think about how we've assimilated that as something normal in such a short period of time, you realize that our cultural expectations of being informed, being aware, being connected, have rapidly transformed in a very short period of time, and that's due to technology.
Quer dizer, a tecnologia tem feito interferências importantes na comunidade.
Well, in some ways. So there are different sides of, different perspectives on this. Some people feel that technology has created greater distance, that people are more isolated because they are spending, you see these pictures of people at a dinner table and everybody's on their phone just tapping away. But there's also greater community online that people can reach. So if you have, for instance, an interest in knitting or medieval literature or fly fishing, you can find a community of people online who share those interests. Now, sometimes these are mundane interests, just things that we like to do. Sometimes they're ideological interests. This goes both ways. This helps for activists to connect, but this also is a way that people wishing to do harm can connect and find each other. So it's complicated.
E como essa intensa exposição e participação das pessoas nas redes sociais tem ajudado a entender questões importantes do nosso tempo?
It's interesting because obviously we are consuming so much more information than we have in the past. In some ways it makes the day feel fuller, because instead of having a conversation with just the people that you physically see, you can have conversations with hundreds of people. You can post something online and reach thousands of people. So the scale of experience has changed. And I think this is one of the ways that technology affects our moment in the world and our moment in time. Because we can go further and have experiences of different places and different kinds of cultures and mindsets and ideologies than would be possible if we had to physically go there and to physically travel to see all these people, these places. So I think in some ways it's really expansive. It's really created a greater sense of the world. in the other hand, it can be overwhelming, and people just say, I'm just going to look at cat videos, I can't deal with this. They just sort of shut down.
Como os governos deveriam lidar com o vazamento de informação?
This is one of the gifts of technology, and also one of the dangers of technology, is that it is no longer a fact that you can keep information bound. As soon as you put it in digital form, it's leakable. So before technology, before the social media era, if someone had a file and wanted to share it with the public, they had to physically get it out, make photocopies, send it to newspapers, etc. Now it's a click of a button. And once information has spread, it's unretractable. It just sort of expands as far as it goes. It's very hard to pull back information once it's got online in some ways. So governments have a real challenge because they have, in many instances, information that they need to keep secret. They need to keep private for security purposes. If you think about dealing with refugees who are seeking asylum, maybe fleeing persecution, that information about those people, we don't want to have that shared with the public. But at the same time, the fear of leaks shouldn't cause governments to clamp down and to stop communicating with each other and stop communicating with their publics. From the research that we've done, leaks generally happen very intentionally. They're not accidental. Most people that have a security clearance can leak information to the press, and almost no one does. The people who have had very clear opinions and clear reasons for why they did so. They believed that that information had to be made public for some greater good.
Como a diplomacia digital tem mudado a política internacional?
They have absolutely transformed the international landscape in terms of the way diplomats communicate with each other. Before there were social media, government interactions with other governments were often behind closed doors or ceremonial. You know, the people shaking hands and have a picture taken together, and that was pretty much what the public got. With social media, it has now become commonplace for diplomatic figures to not only engage with their counterparts in other countries or send messages to other countries, but citizens of other countries. And then those citizens can communicate back. So what used to be a private, ceremonial, closed-door, formal situation has been brought out into the open. Whether regular citizens find it interesting is a whole different story, but for the first time, there is this window into what's happening in the relationships of government that didn't used to be there. Now, that said, it's carefully managed. It's not like the casual tweet of an ambassador at a basketball game was not carefully planned. I'm quite sure it's carefully planned. My experience at the State Department tells me these things are carefully planned. However, there is, again, this expectation that that is appropriate, that you cannot just freeze out the citizens of the world. You have to communicate with them. You have to engage with them, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook or with streaming web video of conferences or events. There's this new normal, and it happened very quickly, just over a few years, that diplomacy is not just a closed-door experience.
Como que a ameaça terrorista pode afetar a nossa comunicação em rede?
It's tremendously complicated, and unfortunately, it gives a lot of power back to people who wish to shut down information, who wish to keep things closed, because one of the ways that terrorists such as the Islamic State, such as ISIS, have built their followings and have amassed the public attention that they have is through social media. So there's really not an effective response yet in place about how to deal with the fact that these tools can be used for good. They can be used to connect activists, to connect diplomats, to make sure that citizens of countries know what's going on, but they can also be used to organize attacks. They can also be used to recruit people to destructive movements. A lot of different governments have tried different tactics. Some governments address it head on. They try to engage with terrorists online and prove them wrong, show them why they're misled. I think this is a mistake. I think that you cannot argue with someone's belief system with facts. There has to be an alternative an alternative narrative provided that is compelling, and facts are not always the most compelling.
Outra questão que está mexendo, afetando o mundo, são as correntes migratórias. Como isso também reflete na nossa comunicação em rede?
Well, this is really another sort of unprecedented situation where this is certainly not the first time that the world has seen mass influx of refugees. You know, there's been several wars where people have fled. One of the unusual things about this particular group of refugees is that a lot of them have phones. Many of them have smartphones, so they're not disconnected from the world. Even the ones that don't have smartphones can receive or send at least text messages. And so the United Nations and other international relief efforts are trying to figure out, well, how do we use this to our advantage? How do we use text messaging to alert refugees? Okay, this is a place where you can go. This is how you get food. This is how you get papers and get processed. On the other hand, there's now this global awareness because of the constant stream of videos and pictures and news stories about refugees, and I think it leads to a bit of a fatigue in the public. People care, but you can only care and be outraged for so long, and then people sort of say, oh, it's not my problem, I can't think about it anymore. So it ebbs and flows, and this is one of the other things that we study here is not just public awareness about an issue in the media, but it's passage over time, and what precipitating events, whether it's a piece of media, a photograph, for instance, of the Syrian boy washed up on the beach, that changes public opinion, has this really powerful impact. So that lasted for a few months, and then now after the Paris attacks, there's a big drop in support for the refugees because people are fearful of their security. And there's been stories linking the movement of terrorists through these refugee waves, and so trying to figure out how to balance activism and tapping into people's compassion without exhausting them with too much information, or without being overly fearful because of massive media coverage of an event. Maybe one person through the millions of refugees turned out to be a dangerous person. But when this is all you see in the news, it's easy to believe that this is the way the world is. So it's hard to figure out the right balance.
Quais as mudanças que na sociedade que você destacaria nos últimos 10 anos que foi reflexo da tecnologia na nossa vida?
In the last 10 years, I really feel that the greatest change is, as I mentioned earlier, this change in expectations, this change in culture. Information sharing, whether it's posting recipes to our friends on social media sites, or reading the news on our phones, or sharing photographs of our vacation, it has become a normal everyday activity, and it creates this connectedness that simply just did not exist before the advent of social media. I don't think that the tool itself is responsible. It made it possible, but it's how people reacted to the tool. If you remember when Twitter first came out in 2005, 2006, in the beginning people were saying, what is this thing? You can post 140 characters? What are we going to do with that? Someone posts, I ate a ham sandwich for lunch. People say, all right, great, that's interesting. And it took a few years for it to evolve. And then all of a sudden, people realized, wait a second, you can link to things with this. You can grab people's attention very quickly with this. And the technological affordances, which were not apparent immediately, is that Twitter was not using the internet as a platform. It was running through the SMS network. So, for instance, during the Iran Revolution in 2009, I believe, cell phone communications were cut off, the internet was shut down, but people could still tweet, so because it was on a different channel. So it's both changed in the sense that there are more ways to get information, share information, but as I said, there's also this sense that people expect it, and it's become a normal part of our lives.
E quando você vê em perspectiva a tecnologia na nossa vida, qual é a grande vantagem, a grande colaboração para melhorar a nossa qualidade de vida aqui?
Well, I must also preface this by saying there's still this massive divide between people who are online and connected to technology and who are not. It's certainly, it's changing, and even a lot of underdeveloped countries with poor infrastructure that don't have necessarily good road systems or power grids, people still have at least a flip phone, that you have at least something. And it's projected that within the next 10 years, a majority of the global population will have internet access. We're not there yet. So I do think that's one of the big changes that will happen in the next 10 years, is that as more and more of the global population has internet access, this kind of culture of information sharing and this expectation to know what's going on will also increase. One of the interesting things I heard from a student of mine who lives in a country with a repressive media climate is that social media, even though it is restricted and they know it's censored, has encouraged people to engage with each other and, for the first time ever, be critical thinkers, to think more carefully about the information they're receiving because there's so much of it. So you have to go through this process of sort of sorting and weeding out what's there. And exactly, and she was expressing to me that this is not how she was raised. In school, she was not taught to think critically, to ask questions. She was taught to listen and be quiet and to obey. And so I think that as a greater percentage of the world population gets online, even if it's a restricted version, even if it's not the full internet that maybe democratic countries have access to, I really think that this sense that people have a right to know what's going on and a right to access information will increase as well. And that will help improve the quality of life, simply because we enjoy learning things. We enjoy being connected.
Hoje nós temos uma excessiva exposição da vida pessoal, da intimidade das pessoas e uma excessiva necessidade de controle. Qual a avaliação que você faz sobre esses dois pontos em paralelo?
It's a tough question. And I don't think that there is a perfect balance. I think it's something that you negotiate every moment of every day. Every time you send an email, you make a decision: how much information do I put in this? Who might see this? How might this get out? What if this was accidentally forwarded to my mother or my brother or my son? Would this be a problem? I think that it's a decision you make as you go through your day-to-day, but also as you grow, you learn maybe something that you posted when you were younger on Facebook or in social media, some other place. 5 years later, when you're looking for a job, you're not so happy that that's out there. So I believe that people go through this self-educating process, often learning the hard way when they see something posted out there or shared widely that they did not feel good about. And so people become more careful. But it's a moment-to-moment decision. Do I send this? Do I post this? Do I reply to this thread? Do I post this picture?
Yes.
And I don't think everyone is that cautious about it. I think some people just willy-nilly to go for it. But I do think that no matter who you are, everyone has had an experience where they wrote something down, sent it into the digital universe and said, ooh, kind of wish I hadn't done that.
Esses são os prós e os contras da excessiva presença das mídias na nossa vida?
So I'd say that the pros of the media in our life is that, as again, this matter of access. We have choice. We have so many options. So for instance, when I was growing up, there were 3 broadcast channels, and that's how you got the evening news. Somebody chose for you what stories you would see every night at 6 o'clock. And you had 3 choices, you had 3 channels to choose from. I never watch television news anymore because I don't want to have somebody else tell me these are the 3 stories that we want you to watch tonight. And I don't even read one newspaper. I will go to an aggregator site that has multiple headlines about the same issue so I can see how 10 different news outlets are framing it. I have choice, I have options.
Yes.
And I can see not just what maybe the liberal perspective or the conservative perspective is saying, but the combination of the two gives you a really good picture of not just the issue.
You decide.
Exactly, and you get to decide. And then if you decide you want more information about it, and they cite a report, you look up the report, and then you can look at the primary source. So there's so much more that you can do to educate yourself now. Those are the pros. The cons: how many people actually use technology in this way? How many people actually read through 20 news articles and find the primary sources of the transcript from the congressional hearing? You know, I'm a wonk. Like, I can't help myself. I like to do that kind of thing, but I think there's also a massive amount of entertainment and sort of empty calories available now to us, and you could quite easily spend most of your time using technology just entertaining yourself and not educating yourself. I think that there should be a balance. I like a good TV show too. I like to be entertained, but I think there needs to be a balance.
E qual o impacto das redes sociais na administração pública e no mundo dos negócios?
It's an excellent question, and it's changing so fast. So it's only been an influential tool for a few years. I was working at the State Department at the our U.S. mission to the United Nations in 2011 when the Arab Spring erupted. And at this time, even just in 2011, 4 years ago, diplomats were barely using Twitter, barely using Facebook. It was still considered a little bit risky to do. But what we discovered and what we were able to share with our diplomats and the ambassadors that we worked with was this is not just about posting press releases. You can learn about what's happening on the ground in a way that you're not going to from news sources, especially when the news source is state-controlled media, or especially when a government cracks down and shuts down the internet in a country. So for instance, in Egypt, when there was the Egyptian revolution, internet was shut down for 5 days. Google partnered with a few other organizations because they had a high-level executive that was taken hostage by the Egyptian police, so they got involved, and they created this app called Speak to Tweet. So even though there was no internet, people could use their phones. And so they set up this service where people could call and somebody would type down what they wrote and put it on Twitter. So Twitter was this listening tool that gave us so much information about what was happening on the ground. So even our diplomats, it's an opportunity to find out not just what's happening logistically or tactically, but how are people feeling? What are people experiencing? Yeah. What's the mood? What's the feeling? And we were able to find out through these kinds of means. It wasn't just angry young people on the street. It was families and older people, and in the beginning, it was really everybody. It was really a people's movement in the beginning. That's the kind of thing that maybe some news stories would have covered, but it gave a whole different flavor by being able to see this reported through social media.
Para encerrar, qual o conselho que você dá para os governos na questão do relacionamento deles com esse mundo tão rico e cheio de informação que é a internet?
So I spent a lot of time thinking about this over the last few years, working with a number of ambassadors and diplomats to help them learn more about the power of social media, also how to be careful on social media, because once something is out there, you can't retract it. There's no such thing as deleting something online, even if you think you might. So it's about knowing how to use the tools and being careful with the tools. When I say knowing how to use the tools, it's not to say you have to act in a certain way or be, somehow different than you are. Just know how you're going to come across. So for instance, if somebody writes a press release, who's going to read a press release? Reporters, people at NGOs, academics. Ugh. On Twitter, it's regular people, generally, and they want to follow ambassadors or diplomats or government officials who seem like real people. They seem like they have a personality. So I encourage people in government to use these tools to be a person and connect with people on a personal level. You can, of course, talk about the policy decisions that you're making, link to press releases, talk about statistics that are important to the policy issues, but you also have to be human, you have to be real. And that's why people are interested in following people on social media. The people with the greatest followings, the real masters of Twitter, I think, in the government world, were the people that were able to have their personality come out. So you really felt like you were getting a sense of the human behind the official title. And this is the other thing, is that between Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and other services that do web streaming, even if nobody watches your parliamentary meeting or your town hall meeting or some other sort of committee meeting, the fact that you put it on the web and allow people to watch it if they want to sends a message. It sends a message that you have nothing to hide. And it sends a message that you will stand by everything that you say because you know you're speaking to the people, even if nobody's watching. Somebody might be watching. So one of the pieces of advice I would often give, and I've written about a good deal, is governments need to really get over this idea that they can say one thing and do something different in their policies. Like, hypocrisy will be exposed in this era so quickly because there's so much information out there. And also, in every country, there are political parties that seek advantage over the other. So the best thing to do to not be caught out or exposed by some sort of scandal is just be honest in the first place. I know that there's a lot of compromises that people have to make in diplomacy and in government, but the more you can align what you say you're going to do with what you actually do, the less risk there is to have it blow up in your face or get in trouble. Here at Harmony Institute, we study the media, which is kind of like saying we study the atmosphere and everything in it. It's a huge task, but it is in a lot of ways kind of like the way we go about our daily lives in the weather. There are events that occur. Once in a while, you'll see a movie or a film or a piece of news will stop you in your tracks, and you realize, oh, this is profound. This changes me in some way. That's rare. Those are sort of like earthquakes, you know. There are storms, like when a scandal erupts or when a terrorist attack occurs, and all of a sudden the media is just completely saturated in events. But most of the time, it's just kind of like the ambient air. It's like clouds or just, you know, a light drizzle. We don't really know why it's affecting us, but it's certainly a cloudy day will have a different effect on our mood than maybe a sunny day. So it's a complicated landscape to study, and I encourage my students who are going to work in government or work in media, work in technology, to really try to think about it not just from a specific perspective, like if I am a government official and I want to get a message across, I do X. Put yourself in the shoes of the people who are going about their daily lives and may see your message. What kind of information is going to be appealing to them? What kind of stuff do they want to know that's going to make a difference in their lives? So in the same way that studying the media ecosystem is massive and huge and has both big events and very tiny and almost invisible events, I think that when you are creating media and sharing media, it's important to think about all the various variables and perspectives that go into how one experiences it. My mission with my classes that I teach at Columbia is to have my journalist students learn how to think like bureaucrats, and have my bureaucrat students learn how to think like activists, and vice versa. Because I feel like only by adopting all those different perspectives and really seeing how complicated the issues are, will they be able to do a better job in whatever field they take, and have a more mature response, more nuanced and complex response.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.